Hi, I'm going to do a review of Ready for Love, Season 4, Episode 8. And we've gotten down to a small, hearty group. And I'm going to go first through the women, what their options are, and how I think things might go for them. And so the first person I'm going to take on is Vernisha. She's, I believe, 39. She is highly committed to Joel, and it's well known. She's a salon owner, and she normally comes with her breasts full out. Joel is very enamored with Vernisha, and they get along well. When he met his friends, it was brought out that she was kind of a clingy person, or she claimed her stake, and she had claimed her stake in Joel, and Joel was a little bit concerned about that. So during this particular meeting, the women were supposed to introduce the man they were interested in, to their past romantic interest, I'll put it that way. Some of these women went way back to find that person. But Vernisha brought a person who seemed very nice. He was very nice to Joel. They shook hands, they smiled a lot. They had a very casual, pleasant conversation. They were eating, and everything looked relaxed. Vernisha did not have her breasts out at this particular luncheon meeting. And that was basically it. They left good terms. Joel was smiling, gave a wave, and said, "See you later." Now the problem with Vernisha is Joel is her only connection. She doesn't have another love interest. She tried to connect with one person, but he said that Vernisha made him nervous, and he ended the date early. He was sent home that same week. So that ended that particular potential relationship. And I believe Vernisha was the person that Jason had earlier said that he didn't think they had a romantic connection because he thought of her as a mom. Jason's a teacher, and he thought of her as one of his students' moms. And so that ended that potential connection. So she really doesn't have any connection with any other person on the show. So that's her problem. Vernisha has only Joel, and once Joel abandoned her, as he did last week, he went with Kyra as the person he was most interested in. And I think he did that because he realized that Vernisha was dangling. She didn't have a support system, and if Vernisha went and he was the only person connected with Vernisha, there was a huge chance he was going to be voted out because he was probably the strongest male left in the pool of men for this show. So he realized he had to go with other people, and so he tested out Amber and Kyra and made good connections with both of those women. With Amber, he kissed her on the cheek when he first came and met her for their date. And when the date ended, Amber kissed him on the cheek. And that made Vernisha very upset because Joel had never kissed her. So it gave her some insecurities about Amber and what was going on with Joel and Amber. The next person is, I'm going to skip down to Liz. Now Liz has two people that she's connected with on the show. She's connected with Jason, who's 36, that's the teacher. And she's connected with David, who is a real estate agent, and a person that she was very interested in as far as her connection. David has 4 kids, has been married twice previously, so this would be his third marriage if he would marry somebody from the show. David and Liz were doing well, together. But on the last date, Liz and Jason shared a kiss, and that information got out, and David became very insecure about that kiss and publicized to the group that Jason and Liz had kissed. So that upset Liz because she felt that the kiss she shared with Jason was supposed to be secret. She told David about the kiss because she did not want him blindsided about having kissed Jason, but she did not mean for David to tell everybody. So that made her very upset, and it caused an argument between David and Liz. Liz had David meet her old boyfriend, who she hadn't seen for many years, and they had only shared one kiss ages ago. But he came out very strong and demanding against David in interrogating David as to why he revealed the information about Liz having kissed Jason, and that he was not supporting Liz, and that he was blindsided her by doing that and had left her hanging out to dry. David tried to defend himself, but it didn't go well, and David finally got up from the table, said goodbye, and so that was kind of a harsh ending. Later, Liz called David for a meeting. When David came in, he knew that there was going to be some sort of confrontation, so he wanted to talk first. Liz says, "No, let me talk first." David says, "No, I want to talk first." Liz says, "No, I want to talk first. You're a gentleman. You're going to let me talk first, aren't you?" And so they go into this, and they're having very heated argument, and David tries to shut Liz up with a kiss, but Liz pushes him away, and the meeting ends. So Liz and David basically leave each other on bad terms after this encounter, and so it looks like Liz and David are basically finished and are not going to be pursuing a romantic relationship with each other. So that leaves Liz only with Jason. Liz is very religious too. I just thought I'd throw that in there. Okay. Next is Amber. Amber is a district attorney, and she has a very great connection with Chris, who is a podcaster, musician, and he sings a little bit on the show. Amber introduced Chris to her past fiance or date, and Chris, you could see, is very worried about this guy. You know, who is this guy? What's he going to reveal? And then he relaxes because the guy tells him that when he was dating Amber, he revealed to Amber that he was gay. And so Chris takes a deep breath of relief, and then they eat and they have a great moment together talking about his past relationship with Amber, and everything goes well. Now, so Amber has two possible connections. She has Chris, who she considers her main connection, and she has Joel, because Joel asked her out on a date when he expanded his prospects in the past week. I'm going to leave Kyra for last, and I'm going to go for Alexis. Alexis has two people. She has Ronald, who is a person who sells caskets, and she has AJ, who she considers her main person that she's interested in. Alexis is 35. She is religious, and not much to say about her. So Alexis introduces her to her past love interest, and he seems very nice. Alexis she invites Ronald. She introduces Ronald to her past love interest, who sits on the sofa, and then Alexis sits next to the past love interest, and Ronald sits, quite a distance away from him on another sofa, which I thought was a little odd. I think since her closest current relationship was with Ron, I thought she would sit with Ron, but she didn't. So anyway, Ron and this guy have a nice talk. There's no food involved. They're just talking. And they're sharing information about Alexis. And Ron says, well, can Alexis cook? And her past friend says, no, he doesn't remember her cooking, really. And so Ron was a little bit concerned about that because he likes to eat. And she asks Ron if he can cook, and he says, well, I cook a little bit, but you could tell he didn't expect to be the main cook of the house. He kind of expected his wife, and Alexis is the potential wife, to be cooking for him. And so that was kind of a stress point for them. So that meeting goes well, and that ends. But later, Alexis and Ron have an argument, and Alexis infers that Ron is using her, trying to get something, and Ron lashes back, well, you can't do anything. You can't offer me anything. And so she's shocked to hear that Ron would say that to her, and that was very off-putting, and it left them with a lot of negativity. And so it appears from that argument that Ron has been ousted from her list of potentials. So if that is true and they're not going back together, Alexis is now left with just AJ, which was not her first choice. Alexis later arranges a date with AJ, and she doubles with Liz and Jason. So Alexis and AJ are talking, and AJ knows that he's on the fence. He doesn't have enough people backing him up, and so he needs to make a connection, if possible, with Alexis, because Alexis can vote to keep him on the show, and so that would be what he would want to happen. So they're talking, and everything's going fine. Alexis is kind of forward, and then AJ moves in, playing around, and gives her a kiss. And Alexis really gets into the kiss, and she wants more kissing, but AJ doesn't do more, and she's happy, at least, that she did get a kiss. And then they're talking some more, and before you know it, Alexis is kind of laying down next to AJ, and AJ doesn't do anything, and then she sits up, and so she is really just, kind of slutty acting on this date with AJ, but at least she's let AJ know that she's interested in meeting him more, because this is her only chance. This is her only person who could vote for her, and that she's let AJ know that she's interested in him, and that she'll probably vote for him to stay, and she would like to pursue further dates with him if they both stay on the show. So she's accomplished what she needed to do there. So Alexis is AJ. Now the last person is Kyra. Kyra is the person who last week ended up with 4 people picking her as their first choice. She had Jason pick her, and Jason's a 36-year-old teacher. And she had AJ pick her. She had Joel, who had never on the show been seen connected with Kyra, but Joel said he had, Kyra said she had met and talked with Joel at the very beginning of the show, and she was interested in him. But she didn't like the fact that Joel had two kids who had lost their mother. And she felt, because she's an attorney and she works a lot, she didn't feel that she was prepared to take on the role of caring for his two kids with the fact that the mother had died. So she had kind of written off Joel because of that. She had met AJ previously, but she wasn't that interested in AJ because they had a money problem when they dated in the past. She knew him from years ago, and at that time she ended up paying for the date. And so they kind of didn't reconnect until this time, and now she's thinking that AJ is probably her best connection on this show. Jason, she has a good connection with Jason, and then David also picked her as his choice. David was the person who got into a fight with Liz after Liz kissed Jason, and David got jealous about the kiss with Jason and then told about the kiss and so forth. I just explained that story. So David, after having that problem with Liz, he picked Kyra as his interest, and so she also has David supporting her to continue to be a contestant on the show. Now Kyra is 34, and she is an attorney. She does estate law and so forth, but she looks older than Jason. So when Jason and Kyra are together, Kyra looks a little bit more like maybe his mother, and so it's kind of a not a great look. But Jason is probably one of the best matches she has of the people that she has to choose from. Joel isn't the best match, of course, because he has a deep connection with Vernicia. As we discussed, she was the first one I talked about. And so he's unreliable. He might vote for Kyra to stay, but if there's a choice between Kyra and Vernicia, there's a huge chance Joel will abandon Kyra and go for Vernicia. But if Joel abandons Kyra and goes for Vernicia, that means Kyra is not going to have that much of an interest in Joel in the future and saving him because he's unreliable. Even though if Vernicia would leave, Joel would be much more reliable as a supporter for Kyra to stay. But, of course, Joel also has that connection with Amber. So there's some question about Joel. So Kyra has to pick among her four people exactly who she wants to try to save. And that's pretty much the dilemma with the women. Now this week, the women are going to be throwing off one man. So of the men that could be thrown off, I figure it's Ronald, who is the man who sells caskets, who was hooked up with Alexis, but then had an argument with Alexis and said, "You can't offer me anything." And she got very insulted. But that would leave her with only AJ. The other person who could go is David. He's the one that had the big fight with Liz about the kiss with Jason. And so David could go. That would leave Liz with just Jason. So those are the two men I think are the most likely to go this week, David and Ronald. And that's my best guess. It doesn't really matter for Chris to go this week because he's hooked up with Amber and he's not going to interfere with anybody else's game. The only other person who might need to go is Joel. If all of the guys ganged up against Joel because he's hooked up with so many people, people like Jason and AJ could feel more secure in their positions in the game with the people they're hooked up with. But if they did get rid of Joel, that means they would have Ronald still in the game, and he's not hooked up with anybody. And they would still have David in the game. And although he claimed he wanted to be with Kyra, Kyra really doesn't have a connection with David. So keeping David in the game would just leave them kind of dangling around. So you would have David and Ronald dangling around because they don't have anybody. So those are the two most likely people to leave, just because who would they date? Now, they could make some deals. Ronald could come down and make a deal with Liz and say, I will vote for you to stay if you don't vote me out. And David could make a deal with Alexis and say, I'll vote for you if you don't vote me out. I don't think either of them would make a deal with Vernicia because of her extremely close connection with Joel, and I don't think they would feel secure that Vernicia would keep them. And she might talk with Joel. There's a lot of talking among all these people at night or after the show, and so she could easily make a deal with Joel, who's the person she's interested in, and backstab one of them in order to keep Joel in. So that's pretty much the lineup for this week. So the two strongest people to go are Ronald and David.